Hello and welcome. I have made quite a few videos and I just recently realized I've never actually made a video explaining how to mix resin. So that's what I'm going to do today. I have this resin here from Craft Resin, and one thing I want to point out here when you're mixing resin is to look at what the mixing ratio is. This says 1:1 mixing ratio by volume, which means I can use my cup and it's by how much I'm pouring. Others will say by weight, and when you have those, you'll need a scale. One other thing I find is particular to the individual are the stirring sticks. I'm just showing you wooden ones now. They have silicone ones and plastic ones. You have typically though a thin and a wide. My personal preference is the wide one. I like it because I feel like it actually mixes and stirs the resin more with less having to turn than the thin one does. It's a personal preference. There is no right or wrong stick or stirring stick to use, but my personal preference is this one. The next thing is the cups. You want to make sure that you find a cup, if you're mixing by volume, that has the measurements on the side. It usually comes in different standards, so you have the ounces, the cc's, the milliliters, and then the cups. This is very important if you're doing by volume. If you're doing by weight, you could just use any cup that doesn't have the graduated marks on it. All right, now that we've covered that, I'm going to open my resin here. And a lot of these kits will come with different things in them. This one has gloves, which is great. And I like the fact that they're white too. And they have two sides, a side A and a side B. I'm going to go back to the front of the box. You'll see here again it says 1:1 by volume. That means you should have as much part A as you do part B, because you're going to do the exact same amount when you mix. This one actually comes with a stirring stick as well, and I actually like these sticks too because it gives you the option. If you prefer the thinner one, like I was showing you before, you can use that side. And if you're like me and you like the larger, you could use that side. This one also comes with instructions, which tells you how to mix the resin and so forth. And apparently there's a coupon as well. All right, so I am going to move that out of my way. First thing you want to do when you get new resin is get the bottles prepared and ready by popping the corks that are in there. Some companies use like a tin foil to cover the top. I'm pleased with the fact that this company uses the plug. It just makes it a lot easier to remove it. A lot of times when you're trying to get the tinfoil type one off, it doesn't all come off and sometimes it gets stuck down in there. And the last thing you want is anything in your resin. Another thing, always keep your resin covered when you're not using it. You're working in an environment, unless it's some type of lab that's completely dust free, you have a risk that you're going to introduce particles into the resin. So it's a good rule of thumb to always keep them closed. Another thing you could do is you could put them in a warm bath prior to starting the mix. That helps with minimizing the number of micro bubbles that transpire during the pour. I have my room at about 75 degrees, so I'm not going to warm the resin, and that's Fahrenheit. I'm going to just pour it the way that it is. And as I said before, this one is a 1:1 by volume. So I'm going to use my graduated cup. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide how much I'm going to make first. And for this, I'm going to make a half a cup. And I'm going to use the 1/4 cup for my part B like boy, and I'm going to use my half cup mark for my part A. That's another thing. A lot of times people pour A first, B first. It depends on the person. I'm pouring my B first. There isn't a right or wrong answer to that because it's all going to mix together eventually anyway. But I am going to keep my eye on this and make sure I get just to that 1/4 cup mark. I'm going to close my resin back up, and then I'm going to grab my other part A, and now I'm going to pour until I hit the 1/2 cup mark. This is very clear resin, it's nice. Okay, and I'm going to close my resin. One other thing I want to say though is, even though it says mix it by volume, you are allowed to mix by weight. The only difference there is if it says mix by weight, do not mix by volume. But if the mix by volume, you can mix by weight, but the mix by weight, you cannot mix by volume. All right, now that I have all of my resin in my cup, I'm going to place my stick down to the bottom, and I'm going to stir initially in a clockwise direction, and I'm not going super fast. I see these videos all the time where people are stirring their resin extremely fast. To me, you might as well just go ahead and use the mixer if you're going to do that. The point of mixing it more slowly is you introduce less bubbles, and the amount of time it takes for the bubbles to float to the top depends a lot on what resin you're using, what the temperature is in your room, what the temperature of the resin was, how much resin you're mixing. Those all are factors in how quickly those micro bubbles will dissipate. You can also use a degasser. The one note there would be, make sure that you have a resin that you're using that has a long curing time, because the degasser usually takes about 10 minutes or so, depending on the amount of resin that you're mixing. Now I'm going to start moving counterclockwise. And as I start doing that, I'm going to start going around the edge of the cup to make sure I'm getting all of the resin off of the sides so that it's getting mixed in as well. You also can do figure eights. So you take your stick and move it in the number 8 pattern. I will occasionally do that. I'm more prone to go clockwise and counterclockwise. I'm going back now clockwise, and I'm now going a little more towards the center, and then I'm spreading out towards the edges. And again, going slowly. Also, don't pick up your stick while it's in there. It will introduce more bubbles, and you don't want that. I've seen other videos too where the person pulls the stick out often, and you know, you have to remember when you're watching a video, you weren't there physically to see what was happening, and that video could have been edited where they're using a different resin than what they showed you, or they did use a degasser. So just because you're seeing others do some of those things, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out the same for you. I will say, if you mix your resin the way I'm showing you, you should not have any issue. Now, when you're mixing your resin, I'm going to stop, I'm going to leave the stick in there, I'm going to zoom in. There are these lines in the resin. I know you can see the micro bubbles, but there are these lines within this resin here, and they're called striations. When you're mixing, that point is to mix until you have none of those. And then when you go back around the sides, a lot of times you'll see your striations come in because you still have some resin there. So I can see them right down in the middle. They're right there. There's one right next to my stick. So there are several still left. And what I'm going to do is just continue slowly stirring clockwise, counterclockwise, going and picking up the resin on the sides. And I'm going to do that until this is crystal clear. And I no longer see any of those lines in my resin. One other thing I want to make sure to note is when you get resin and you look at the instructions, it says mix for 5 minutes, let's say. When I first started, I followed those directions. I even had a timer, and then I would wonder why my resin wasn't setting properly. And it's because it doesn't matter about the amount of time. What matters is mixing until it's completely mixed together. Again, I apologize for not making this sooner, but I hope you found this video helpful. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and press the bell to be alerted to future videos.